Happy Monday, everyone. I'm Greg Dixon. I'm here with Margo Arrowsmith, and we're going to talk about establishing boundaries with your family when you're discussing your perfect retirement living. So you were inspired to talk about that this week, Margo. What do you have in mind?
Well, I have been a therapist working with individuals and families for over 40 years. So I kind of know what I'm doing. um, to give myself a little more credibility, Brene Brown, who is a nationally known social worker like myself, she has a doctorate, um, will also say the same thing about how important boundaries are. You can't have intimacy without boundaries. Here's my little puppy in the background showing how important all this is by scratching her neck. But you can't have intimacy without boundaries. You can't have a real relationship without boundaries. Um, and what boundaries are, the way I describe boundaries generally is that boundaries are where you begin and other people end. Now, again, my boundaries with my butcher are going to be very different from my boundaries with my children, because, of course, you're going to be more open to people that are close to you. However, sometimes that makes it even harder to keep healthy boundaries when you're dealing with people in families. And of course, a lot of what we're talking about is when we start to get older and children start to worry about us. And that's a time when, even in very healthy families, when boundaries have been very good, where they can start to get a little shaky. And there is a large segment of marketers who are only more than happy to, I'm going to use the word, not a very nice word, exploit that. And let me give you an example. Many of you have heard of the rule, and it is a rule, of the 20/80 rule. And I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you a little bit of a example of that. For instance, people who run nonprofits, and usually nonprofits depend a lot on volunteers, and they will often say that 20% of their volunteers do 80% of the work. And when I tell someone, oh yeah, that makes sense. And in business, that there's all sorts of applications, and of course, it's not exactly 80/20, but it works. It's a rule. It works enough and often enough that we can call it a rule. Well, about a year or so ago, a senior housing marketing company started floating this idea, and they called it the 40/70 rule. They use the word rule. And basically, when I read about it, it was, if you're in your 40s and your parents are in their 70s, it's time that you start looking into their affairs. Now, that, my dears, is a huge, huge violation of boundaries, and it's going to cause trouble. And this last week, I was talking with one of my clients who I consult with, and I want to tell you her story because this really illustrates it a lot. She's in her 70s. She has 3 children who are in their, well, 2 of them are in their 50s, and the other is late 40s. They're all very successful. They all make, seriously, all 3 of them make mid 6-figure salaries. They all do very well for themselves. However, my client, who I consult with, is also very successful. In fact, even though she's in her 70s, she has a waiting list of clients who want her to consult with them about their businesses. She's a business consultant. Okay. And ironically enough, 2 of the 3 children have had problems at work, even though they're very successful and very much desired by the companies for whom they work. They've also had problems because they have trouble socially, kind of trouble offending people, and she has come in and helped them work those out. So they know she's good at what she does. However, 2 of them have refused to acknowledge the fact that she's still working. One of them keeps trying to get her to come to their house, to a place near them, which is a CCRC, where she should go and look because she needs to be there. And don't worry, Mom, I'll pay for it. Totally ignoring who she is. I mean, that's ignoring boundaries, and in a very unhealthy way. Even ignoring boundaries to the fact where they won't even realize that, in fact, this woman is a very successful, in demand. She has a waiting list, in demand professional. They want to think of her as being basically this little old lady sitting in a rocking chair that needs her children to swoop in and take care of her. So when she first came to me, what she basically said was, I want help because I just basically need to let go of my children, pretend that I never had them, that they don't exist. I mean, very drastic, because she had tried to get them to honor her boundaries, which is that she's a successful businesswoman who knows what she's doing and knows what she wants. But they kept, going over her. And it's taken us 2 years. And finally, the other day, she got one of them. This is kind of funny, except that it's tragic. But one of them says, Mom, this was a couple of weeks ago, of course, Mom, it's tax time. So, before you do your taxes, you better talk to me so I can help you with them. So after 2 years of work of this woman, exerting her boundaries, but doing it in a way. See, now this is what's important, Greg. I want people to do it in a way that does not break up the family. And I think sometimes that's what people are afraid of, that if they exert their boundaries, they're going to break up the family or make more trouble. But anyway, so she said to her daughter, now her daughter makes mid 6 figures. She makes a lot of money. She's very successful. However, her daughter gets a W-2. For those of you in Canada, a W-2 is what an employee gets from his or her employer. And then you give that to the government. And if you're making 6 figures, you probably aren't going to even go for deductions, because you'd have to have many, many, many deductions before it would be worthwhile. And there really aren't any deductions, business deductions, that are allowed to an employee. So basically, this woman, no matter how much money she makes, her taxes mean she gets a W-2. She writes the amount of money she makes. She looks at the amount of money her employer has taken out. If it's more than she owes, she gets money back. If it's less than she owes, she pays money. The whole thing takes 5 minutes. So her mother says, well, okay. And it starts to explain to her about all the business deductions and all of a business tax account is very complex. This was the first time her daughter was able to say, oh yeah, I guess you do know something. But now here's the reason for the story. Well, besides that, it's an important story. The reason for the story is that besides knowing where you begin and somebody else ends, where you end and somebody else begins, what she described this as was a sense of peace. And it was the first time I'd ever heard it. When you have healthy boundaries in your family, you get a sense of peace, and then being safe with your family so that you can then build relationships. Whether the parents are doing it to the adult children or the adult children are doing it to the parents, when boundaries are constantly being challenged, it's like a war. It's awful, and it affects the relationships. So not only does it sometimes end up with people living where they don't want to live, but it affects the relationships. So one of the things that I talk about in the course, and I consult with people with all the time, is the importance of relationships and how to do it, but not like this woman first came to me with, I just want done with these people. They're my children. I love them, but I can't stand it anymore. I teach people how to do it in a way that leaves them with a sense of peace and with the knowledge that they have the ability to help make their family healthier and stronger so that they can get together at Christmas and have a nice time.
That's great, Margo. Yeah, I have a experience with a family who just the kids got involved. They couldn't agree with each other. I don't know if they even asked their mother what she wanted, but
Yeah.
it it created a total hell for her
Yes,
mother
it does.
and everybody. And even though the mother was living in a home that's now probably worth $3 million or something,
Yeah.
she ended up more or less dying alone in a hospital, a ward of the state. So, and it took
Yeah.
10 years of fighting after she died to sort it all out with her
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. And this just happens too often. And one of the problems, of course, is that the people who want to tell you how to spend your parents' money or tell you how to spend your money, they don't care because frankly, you, they can, when people start to think, they start to invade their parents' boundaries and start to make decisions for them. And the case you mentioned, that is all too common, where not only was the mother's life miserable the last 10 years, and it could have been wonderful. If she had gotten a reverse mortgage, she could have had 24/7 help in the home. But now the siblings aren't there. The whole family has been, cast asunder, as they say, to get biblical about it. It's very sad. And I have another story, and this one is, well, it's still sad. I got this from my hairdresser. Her grandmother's sister was in her late 90s, and she decided, crazy, as we would all think it's crazy, she decided she wanted to learn how to ski. Now that I agree is crazy, but who am I to tell that woman what she wants to do? One of the things I always say is when you lose your right to make bad decisions, you've also lost your right to make good ones. You got to remember that. Anyway, she knew if she went to her daughter for help, that her daughter would have a fit and try and stop her. And even if she couldn't stop her, the whole thing just wouldn't have been as much fun. So what she did was she went to her granddaughter, who did understand boundaries, and she understood her grandmother. So what she did, instead of giving her grandmother advice, she gave her information. She said, "Grandma, did you know that there's this thing called cross-country skiing?" Grandma had never heard of it. "And you're on skis, you're in the snow, you're all bundled up, but you're not speeding down a hill. It's kind of like walking, only you're doing it on snow. But you're skiing. It's called skiing." Well, Grandma thought that sounded like a great idea. So they got all the information they needed. They rented their equipment. They went out. They had a lovely few hours. I mean, Grandma wasn't out there for the whole day, I'll tell you. But they had a lovely few hours. And afterwards, they went out to dinner, and Grandma and granddaughter had a lovely time. What's tragic about that is because she would have tried to enter into making a decision that wasn't hers to make, the daughter missed out on all that fun. So sometimes it's as tragic as it is with the story, Greg, that you mentioned. And sometimes it's just kind of sad because the daughter missed out on all the fun she could have had if she had been out there, the three of them, spending a couple of hours cross-country skiing. So, it can have drastic consequences invading somebody's boundaries. It can have medium, consequences, like in my first story where this woman was ready to give up on her kids. I guess I'll call it medium because it worked out. And then you could have some that aren't that important, but frankly, I think that this woman didn't get to have fun that day with her mother and her daughter. Well, I don't know if I'd call that small anyway. That's pretty sad. It's important to learn boundaries. Boundaries don't mean that you can't, that you're rigid and stiff, because, my first story, that's what she wanted. She thought that was her only way out when she first came to me, and by working together, we learned, or she learned, that there are ways to do it that can keep your relationship healthy. And as she described it, left her with a sense of peace and hopefulness, as opposed to, just get away from me, get away from me.
Yeah, I think the key word there is, like, the granddaughter came and provided some information and an option for her to choose, and it was up to her to choose it. So so part of this is having a meaningful discussion of options rather than, one party or the other feeling they need to make a decision for the other.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So that's
Exactly.
easier said than done. Like with the example I had, there was something really had gone off the rails in their childhood, and there was no there was no agreeing or conversation to be had on anything.
What you said, Greg, is so true, because a lot of this really does get back to childhood. I had in my office one day a woman in her 80s who was perfectly capable, by the way. As a matter of fact, a year later, I texted her yesterday because I needed some information from her. She's doing great. but her two children had decided, the lawyer used the term kidnapping, but I'm sure the children didn't. But anyway, I had her and her son in my office, and I'm trying to explain to him, your mom's fine. She can live by herself. And he says, well, I worry about her. And, but in the conversation, finally, he looks at me and he says, well, she used to tell me what to do. And I look back at him, I said, when you were a child, when was the last time she told you what to do? And he's like, oh. And I even said to him, because he was, he says, well, I'll worry if she's living there all by herself. I'll worry. So, I said to him, well, you're a police officer. So wouldn't that give your mother the right to look at you and say, son, when you're out there being a police officer, that's a dangerous job. I worry about you. So I think you should retire. Well, he couldn't. So on the one hand, he thought he had the same rights with her as she had with him when he was a child. But on the other hand, he had trouble seeing the parallel there between, yes, you worry about your family when they're not, when you don't have control over them, but that does not mean you have the right to tell them how to live their lives. That's what a boundary is about. But again, you could do like my client first wanted to do and just walk away from her kids, or you can put in some work. And it's not always as much work as this woman had to put in. Her kids were pretty stubborn, but you can put in a little bit of effort and learn about boundaries. And Greg, to get back to what you said, one of the things I always tell people is to think about any resentment that you have from when you were a child. And it doesn't have to be a big one. It could be a little one. Like, when I made my list, I tell people to make a list. When I made my list, when I was taking care of mom and dad, and then mom died and I had dad for another 5 years. And my dad was a dream. I mean, everybody loved my dad. My dad was the easiest guy in the world to get along with. But I'm making my list. And I remember when I was in the 7th grade, he didn't come to my choir concert. Mom, neither one of them did, in fact. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that was like 50 years ago. And it's still in my head. Now, if I hadn't gotten it out of my head and onto the paper to look at it and say, well, that's silly, it would have still been in the back of my head and it would have affected me. It would have, that kind of resentment would have affected me. When you put it down on paper and you look at it and you can say, oh, well, I had no idea I was still hanging on to that. I guess I can let it go now. If it's in the back of your head and you don't write it down, you can't let it go. And it will pop up at times that you just don't even know. And Greg, I think, as you say, with that example that you gave, I think that was some of the problem. These people were having fights that were 30, 40 years old.
No,
and at that point, they had it over their mother.
Yeah, exactly. I think there were some resentments started with, I think there's probably a PhD in psychology thesis in here.
Oh, at least.
Somewhere. But I got a clue one day about what the issue was,
Yeah.
but it's certainly nothing, I'd probably get shot if I even said that out loud to any of the children, because I think it's something that they probably wouldn't even have seen themselves.
Exactly. But it's interesting because you could see it. And you're not, and you're a very insightful person. I know that. However, you're also not a person that's trained to do that. So hopefully somebody who is trained could have seen it even quicker than you saw it. But of course, I mean, you have that ability, but if, with the training, you would have probably spotted it earlier than you did spot it. But yeah, we got to get that stuff. And again, that doesn't mean you need 10 years of analysis in order to do it. I mean, I have suggestions for ways that people can do it a lot quicker. One of them is writing the list and really writing down, no matter how, I didn't want to write down that I was mad at dad because he didn't come to my 7th grade choir concert. I didn't want to write that down because it made me seem foolish. But once I wrote it down and I could read it, I'm like, oh yeah, gosh, you know what? Now that I see it, I can give it up. And it made it so much easier. Even as great as my dad was, that would have gotten in the way if I hadn't let it go. But I have to see it before I can let it go.
Yeah, I'm watching a television series in Canada here called Sully's Crossing, and there's a lot of it is a daughter and a father who had some issues happen when she was young, and I think the mother misunderstood something about the father, and the father misunderstood something about the daughter, and they're not really talking to each other. So I'm sure at episode 7, year 7, they might actually figure it out. But
Well, of course,
yeah,
they will draw it out because if it's a successful show, they want
yeah,
to keep
yeah,
it going.
yeah,
But that's again. I'm glad, Greg, that you can like see that show and say, well, that isn't just an interesting show. Oh, I can see how that applied over here. But that's part of what being aware of your boundaries are. It's
yeah,
it's knowing where these thoughts and these emotions are coming from.
yeah. Seems like a good time to bring it back to your perfect day exercise.
Yeah,
Because if you, as you said, making a list of things that might be an issue between you and your family, it's also about, on a positive side of things, plan for what you really want for yourself, and
exactly.
then look at the options and provide look for information about, in order to make the decisions, right, the right
Well, yeah.
decision. Or
First step is finding out things about yourself that you have either forgotten or maybe never even consciously knew. That's why I suggest, people sit down and write, where do you wake up in the morning? What time of day is it? What kind of sheets and bed are you sleeping on? What's the first thing you do? I mean, really in detail. And not about a bucket list day, but about just an average day, the way you want your average day to be in your life. And that's the first step. And then it's looking at it and learning how to use the information that you get from there to decide exactly what it is you want. And then the second step are the modules about all of the things that are available to people, from staying home, staying right where you are. And I think, Greg, next week we're going to have somebody on that's going to talk about how to refit houses to make them ideal for us as we age. But anyway, but my list of options I can go from there to senior housing, which is good for some people, to escaping on a cruise ship, because there are people who live on cruise ships, older people who live on cruise ships. But there's a whole range. And then within each range, there are a dizzying amount of options, especially within senior housing. It's like, you really have to know what's out there, and have to know how to ask questions, even the questions they don't want you to ask, and how to make sure that everything that's promised to you is guaranteed. And there's more to the course. And of course, Greg is helping me, and we're doing things like this, where we keep adding more information to the course.
yeah,
Because I'm guessing all of these videos that we're doing get added to the course. So you're watching this today, and I hope you're getting a lot out of it, but it will disappear, but it'll always be at the course. Everything's going to be available for you to learn. And we have a Facebook group. I will be there to answer questions. And eventually people will be there to ask each other questions, and you guys can help each other with, I learned this when I was there, and and talk with each other. So it's a really exciting and groundbreaking program.
yeah. No, that's fabulous. So you can find out more at yourperfectliving.com, and find out about it. Just incredibly good information. Anyway, back to your comment about living on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
I was in a band and somebody wrote a song called "I Want to Live in a Beer Commercial." So that's probably not a realistic option for anybody. And maybe if you actually lived in a beer commercial, it might get old. But
But you know what, Greg? I mean, and you're exactly right. It's like, you may, as the Rolling Stone said, you don't always get what you want, but you get you may not really want to live in a beer commercial. But you know what I would suggest you do is, well, what is in that beer commercial that makes you want to live there? Because you take out the aspects that attract you. And obviously you don't want to live in a beer commercial, and you probably don't even want to live that way. But, oh, gee, every night they get together and drink beer. I would like to be someplace where I have friends where every night we can get together and have a martini. You see what I'm saying?
yeah,
If there's something that you're attracted to, you don't just jump into it. Yes, Greg, I mean, as fun as that sounded, Greg, you're very right. Just because it looks like fun doesn't mean it would be. But you take that, and then you look at the various aspects of it, and you pick that out, and you say, now, how can I get that part, that one part that I really want? Is there a way I can get that? And we teach you how to apply that to your decision.
yes, no, that's perfect. Anyway, there's a divide between Canada and the US with beer commercials.
Oh, I'll bet there
Yeah,
is.
so in the US is a typical beer commercial is that it's Miller time. It's the end of
Right.
the day, everybody's working really hard, and then then at 5 o'clock you can go have a beer. You'll never see anybody working in a Canadian beer commercial. Yeah,
Oh,
so yeah, it's just I think that's the appeal is that you're going out and having a bunch of fun and not going. So that's a retirement. That's kind of a
well,
you know
exactly. Well, two
yeah
things about America. One is that we're kind of taught that we should always be working, no
yeah
matter what. I mean, that's why we only get 1 or 2 weeks of vacation a year, whereas in Europe they get 2 months. But the other thing is, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I'm going to start looking now. Is that, and I don't know if it's true for beer. Well, no, we cannot have liquor commercials at all. But I think even for beer, people can be seen holding a beer in their hands. They cannot be seen drinking it. Now,
yeah
I could be wrong about that, and it may have been that it was true once and it got changed. But again, that's very American. It's being puritanical while at the same time, being loose, but we still have to
yeah
be hardworking and puritanical. So
yeah. Well, uh, you just have to follow the history of prohibition in Tennessee.
oh, I'll
An
bet it's something. Yeah.
interesting story.
Yes.
We
Yes. Oh,
toured the Jack Daniels facility, which is amazing,
yeah.
considering they weren't allowed to sell whiskey in the state or
Right. Any
their
state.
county
Yeah.
for most of their existence. But
Oh, really? Even before prohibition, then?
yeah, no, they went all the way through it. They actually thrived during Prohibition. But I mean, our Reverend John McLean in Nashville says, "Oh, don't worry, they still sold whiskey."
Tennessee thrived during prohibition because they already knew how to break the law, and they were old hats at it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
There's a beer company up in Canada, and they pride themselves on their underground bootlegging history. They kind of like celebrate themselves like they're pirates.
I love that. I'll tell you, Greg, I love doing these things with you because I love teaching people how to take care of themselves and how to learn about themselves and about my course. And I also love, we always manage to get in something about the difference between America and Canada. And that I always learn a lot from that too. So that's good too.
Yeah, no, that's good. So anyway, so yeah, so that's that's the whole goal really of your course is for people to have a vision for their what they want to do, how they want to spend their
Mhm.
last years in a way that works for them.
Yep.
And the theme today was establish boundaries with your children because if you don't really have good discussion with your children, they're going to they with the best of intentions, they may take you down a path that is won't work for you. So
I had a case once with it was a son and a daughter, and she had and then both of the son admitted this too, but she had a grudge against her mother and was actually trying to do it because she was mad at her mother from 40 years earlier. The son just wanted to do what was best for his mom. So one of them, it was in the same family. One of them had bad intentions, the other one had good, but they were both stepping over boundaries and actually making this woman's life harder. So, yeah, you're right. It doesn't just because there are good intentions doesn't mean it's going to work out.
yeah. Our mother never asked us for any input on what she did.
But,
We had there's no say in the matter.
well, and your mother did okay.
Yeah, she did okay. Yeah, uh she didn't live as long as she had expected, but it was
Well, she lived it the way she wanted to live it.
yeah, she did. She lived it the way she wanted to live, and she she miscalculated a little bit. I think her plan was to break even, like spend all of her money before she passed away, but she didn't quite make it that long. So
There's a book called Die Broke,
yeah,
and it's basically about that. It's like, your kids will take care of themselves. You enjoy your life. You worked hard for you enjoy
yeah,
your life. But you don't know. It doesn't always have, like with your mother. It doesn't always have to be that one way or the other.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. My
it,
only regret was that her health deteriorated, and she wanted to go to Spain and Portugal. So that was on my list to go with her to
and
go
she
to
didn't make it.
but she had made it everywhere. She'd been to China, South America. She went to Egypt and Greece. She was interested in antiquities, sort of archaeological sites,
Yeah. Oh, wow.
anthropology, that kind of thing. So that's what she wanted to go to university. Speaking of resentments with your family, she wanted to go to university and study that. And her parents would put up money for her youngest sister to go to nursing school, but they wouldn't help her go to
She's an
university.
archaeologist. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think she could have let that go a lot earlier, because she did go to visit all those places and she read all the books, and she was a bit of a curmudgeon. I don't think she would have got along with, she would have been arguing with the, the instructors all the time, but maybe that was the thing for her. She liked a good, lively discussion.
Well, there you go. There you go. Of course, back in the days when your mother was young, especially women, like a man could do it, but if a woman did it, she was whatever. But because
Yeah.
your mother was young a long time ago, so
Yeah, well, she kind of broke those molds too when she was during World War II. She was a machinist,
mhm.
and she was really good at it. And she basically she insisted on getting paid as much as the men were getting paid.
Oh,
She
I
said,
love your
she
mother.
said, I'm better than all those guys.
I
I need to
love
be
your
paid
mother.
for
She
it.
wasn't going to just sit back and put up with that. I love it.
No,
I
no,
love it.
no, she didn't put up with it.
Yeah.
So
She also sounds like she might have been a candidate for retiring on a cruise ship if she'd known about it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. She
Yeah.
she could have, yeah. Yeah, so she had had a pretty good life. She'd been across Canada, down
Yeah.
through the States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind
She
of
had
kind of
what had happened is she had a undetected aneurysm,
oh,
which ended up putting pressure on her optic nerve, so she was having trouble with her eyesight.
yeah.
And we didn't really figure that out for the longest time. We just, she was grouchier than normal, and stopped doing a lot of the things that she was doing, because
Oh,
she was
that's sad.
volunteering at a local hospital with a garden project, and teaching pottery and all sorts of stuff. But
How old was she?
well, she was 84 when she passed.
Well, but still, I mean, that's a time when a lot of people would have said, "Oh, you need to go someplace where they take care of you," and your mother never did that, and that
No,
that made her happy. So,
no, she's figured she was genetically determined to live to about 99, but
well,
uh, you know,
well, this thing in her brain didn't help.
no,
But
but
I'll tell
smoking
you,
and drinking a lot of coffee all the time didn't help either.
probably not. But Greg, I mean, with all of these people who just they want their parents to be alive, and that's all that matters. And I know you would have loved to have seen your mother live longer. However, hearing you talk, I know that you are also getting joy from knowing how she lived her life.
Yeah, no, she was a role model for all of us, and and she was very independent. She made her decisions, and so one of our stories is when I had a young family living at her house with two young boys, and one day she says, "Oh, I'm going to sell the house and get a one-bedroom apartment." Oh, so I guess it's time for us to get our own
That's
place, right?
out of the house, isn't it? Yes. You take the house away from the kids. That's what you do.
Yeah, there we go.
I wish I could have met your mother. She sounds
Yeah,
terrific.
yeah, she was great. So whatever, so that's that's my story. Is somebody saying, okay, it was up, had to be living in the house to 40. He says, well, my mother sold the house, so we couldn't live there
That's
anymore.
how she got me out.
Yeah, she did go away and work out of town and left it
Wow.
under our care when I was like 21, which is not. We terrorized the neighbors because I always had a band. So
Oh, oh, yes. That you
they
don't want
said it was. I talked to them later, and they said no, it wasn't really that bad, but I think it was bad. We played music all the time, and sometimes people would come and park their vehicles on the front lawn.
yes,
And
yeah.
and one neighbor was Danish, and she was really finicky. Like, she cut her lawn um, two times a week, and one year when Anne and I were there, Anne let the front yard bloom because natural grass has little
Right.
flowers and dandelions and stuff in there.
Right.
Anyway, I could see the neighbor there. She was just like almost like she's anxious and just twitching,
Yeah.
because she had visions of all these dandelions going to blue seed blowing into her yard.
Dandelions are wonderful things, but yeah, my father hated them too, and I couldn't understand it because I thought they were pretty. So anyway, and
Yeah.
and they're very ecologically progressive. But anyway,
Yeah, no, you would have liked my mother for sure.
I'm sure I would have. I'm
Yeah.
sure I would have.
So
Well,
on that note, go visit yourperfectliving.com, and there's just
retirementliving.com.
your perfect retirement living. Well, actually, it could be
Well,
yourperfectliving.com
that's true too, because you
because
don't have to be retired. Yeah,
yeah, so if you're 20 years old and went through those exercises and planned your life, it could be pretty good too.
that. Yeah, you know what, Greg? You're right about that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Anyway,
And anyway, so thanks for joining us on Monday morning, and go and enjoy your day.
yeah, we'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Bye.